everybody. So today we're going to learn a little bit about annealing, and I just wanted to give you a quick setup of what the booth should actually be like. Over here on your right hand side, sometimes it's on the right, sometimes it's on the left, depending on which booth you're in. But this is a torch, and the torch gas is going to be on the red knob, and the air is going to be on the green knob, and you actually have to turn them on in a specific manner, which I'll show you in a little bit. Additionally, underneath the booth down here, there are valves that turn on and off the air, the gas and the air. And you notice how like the hoses are the same color that the knobs were before. Additionally, there's a tripod with a steel grate on top of it and a striker in the booth right now. I'm also holding in my hand a steel tweezers, which normally is in the silver or steel tweezer bucket that we have over outside of the booth. Additionally, outside of the booth, because it's flammable and we don't want anything flammable inside the booth. The flux container itself is made out of plastic and paper, and it could burn, so we don't want that in the booth. So we're going to keep that outside of the booth, but this is flux that we're going to be using. We also need a flux brush, which is actually in your toolkit, and then there's going to be a bucket of water for quenching over here on the side. The last thing that you need to know about is up on top, there's actually a light for you to set things up, and we can turn it off when we're actually working so that we can see what is happening with the heat in the booth. So in order to light the torch, what you need to do is you actually have to come down underneath the sink. Generally speaking, when you're not using the torches, they should be in this perpendicular position, because it means that the gas and air is off. When we want them on, you actually have to turn them toward or parallel to the pipe in order to make the gas and air flow. Okay, and you'll just adjust because they actually both turn different directions, but you'll figure it out. Additionally, when you start the torch, you actually want to turn on the red knob just a tiny bit, and you're going to use the striker to make a flame, and then you can adjust the flame by using the air. We actually want a rather large amount of gas and another large amount of air in order to create a annealing flame. Right now though, we are going to actually turn this off, and here's why. If you'll notice above my head, there's actually a vent hood. The vent hood is to prevent any extra gas from coming in the room and hurting anybody that's in here. And actually, if you notice also, I am wearing safety glasses when I'm soldering. I also have my hair tied back. That's very, very important. And to be completely honest, I should probably take off any kind of dangly anything that could produce a flame if I get too close to the torch. When we go to anneal, what we're going to want to do is we take our piece of metal and we're going to have to put some flux on it. When we put flux on it, I normally suggest that people sand with 220 their piece of metal, because the flux will actually stick to the piece better. And here you can see I've got the flux in this container, and it's kind of like a squeeze bottle. What I'm going to do is I poured a little bit on my piece, and then I actually want to spread the flux on both sides of my piece, because technically what the flux is doing is it's going to help prevent fire scale for annealing. It actually does a different procedure when we are soldering, and we will talk more about that when we actually solder. So right now we just need to prevent fire scale, and that's like a black residue that goes over the top of your piece as you're annealing, and it prevents solder from flowing, and it creates some other problems. Oh, also, so right now I'm actually ready to anneal, and I could turn this light off. I'm actually going to turn it off so that I can see the color of the metal as it is being annealed. However, before I start using my torch, I actually need to turn the vent hood on, and if you look right on the wall, it says switch for soldering vent. We actually want to turn that on, and it's going to get loud in just a moment, and I will try to talk through what's happening, but you might not hear my voice as well because of the vent. It's going to be very loud. Now we actually are going to anneal, so I'm going to turn the red knob on, light the torch, turn the gas quite a ways up, still make it that, the annealing flame is what this is. It's not as tight as what we would want for soldering. We wanted a looser, feathery flame, but it's really big and really loud. And again, I have to move anything that could potentially get on fire from away from my work. I'm gonna pull the tripod closer to myself so that I can actually reach the metal. And if you notice, you see how I'm kind of like petting the metal with the flame? It's almost like as if I was petting a duck or a baby bird. And the reason I'm doing this is I need the flux to dry slowly so that it really stays on the entire piece. So like right here, I might want to add just a little bit more flux, and then I'll actually cover that up. So what I'm going to do is go from underneath, because heat rises and literally the molecules that are inside the metal will vibrate, and they're actually like loosening up. If we think about solids, liquids, and gases, we're actually creating more space in the metal by heating it. And I am purposefully only heating the copper for right now. What's going to happen as I continue to do this is hopefully you can see it's starting to glow kind of a dull orange. That piece is actually annealed, and I'm going to move this over just a tiny bit, and now I'm going to actually anneal my piece of nickel. And the nickel is probably going to take a little bit longer because it's a little bit thicker piece of metal. You do need to be aware that the larger the piece of metal is, the longer it's going to take to anneal. And it also takes longer to solder. So here I'm starting to get my little dull orange glow, and I'm going to move my torch away once I'm done annealing. One thing that you need to be aware of is technically nickel should not be quenched because it will immediately temper the metal, and you will not be able to texture your metal with any of the punches if you quench, which means putting this in water. Do not quench nickel. We do, however, quench copper as soon as I can pick it up. So sometimes what happens, and you see how it got stuck there a little bit? The flux is technically filled with borax, which is, it has silica particles in it, which is glass. So sometimes this gets stuck to here. If you let it cool down a little bit, you'll be able to pry it right off. Then what we're going to do is over by the quenching bucket, we actually are just going to immerse the piece into the water. And I don't know if you guys heard over the top of the soldering vent, but technically there was a little sizzle when I put the copper into the water, and literally I can touch it, which means I want to leave my tweezers right over here. Once my piece of metal has been annealed, whether it's nickel or copper, I need to take it from the soldering booth and actually move it over to the pickle station, which I'm going to do in a second. What happened to this piece of nickel is the flux that was on it actually stuck, it solidified to the firing grate. You do have to be careful of that. Sometimes you can actually pry it off. You can also get it off while it's still warm. When you touch this though, you have to be very careful because there are sharp pieces of technically glass. The flux turns into glass once it's been fired. So now that it's cool, I have it in my hand. I'm gonna put the steel tongs back, and I'm gonna take my piece of nickel and I'm gonna move over to the nickel pickle. So now what I need to do is I need to put my piece into the pickle, but before I do that, I have to make sure that I'm wearing my PPE or personal protective equipment. I have on a rubber apron, which is what I would suggest to use for pickle, because pickle is technically acid and it can eat away at your clothes if you splash it onto your clothes. Additionally, you should be wearing goggles and gloves in order to eliminate the risk of exposing your skin or clothing to the acid. The goggles are going to be located right next to the pickle pots, and the apron and the gloves are actually down underneath this cabinet, which you have access to. Now I'm going to put on, I should put on my goggles first, because once I have those gloves on, it's a little bit hard to move. You do have to be careful. If you have other glasses, just like I have glasses, you still have to use these goggles just so that you don't get the acid splashed back in your face. You only have one set of eyes, so you want to make sure that they last your whole life. So here I'm putting on my gloves. Technically, I'm going to then take a copper tongs, and I'm going to take the piece of metal and put it into the nickel pickle. I can actually put the nickel pickle or the piece into the pickle with the tongs, or I can actually drop it. But notice, because I'm dropping it, there might be some splashback, so I want to make sure that I'm protecting myself and not getting that acid in my eyes. Also, when I am done with the pickle, I want to make sure to cover the pickle, because the fumes from the pickle can actually create their noxious fumes. Noxious means that they're poisonous to humans. You don't want to breathe in the fumes that come off of the pickle, especially if they are boiling. We always only really have the pickle pots on low. That is specifically important when you are also using regular pickle. Regular pickle creates those noxious or those deadly fumes, and you could literally kill yourself just by breathing things in if you do not cover the pickle. So we don't want to ever put our faces over the top of the pickle pot. I'm going to uncover this one because I have my piece of copper that I was pickling earlier, and I do have to kind of dig around a little bit to get it. And here you can see there's a little bit of fire scale mark still on there, and I can brush it off as much as possible. That's probably as good as that's going to get until I sand the rest of it off. Once I'm done with the pickle, I recover that pickle again to make sure I don't expose anyone else. I'm putting my copper tongs back, and then technically I'm going to come over to the sink and I'm going to wash my piece of copper. And once all of the rest of the residue of the acid is off, I can take my gloves off. I washed my gloves a little too, so I'm totally safe right now. And then technically what I'm going to do is use some paper towel and dry my metal. The reason I'm drying the metal is I do not want to have water on my metal when I'm working with any of the tools, like the anvil or any of the punches. It will actually rust and ruin those tools, so we want to make sure that we're not having wet metal on the tool surface.